Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sire here today to discuss with you more about the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Remember, this is the second part in the four-part series, so if you're not already, do go back and check the first video where we went over the lead up towards this at the end of 1915 into 1916. Do remember as well, this is for the student level, GCSE and A level. So the content and knowledge is introductory in nature. If, of course, you would like more detailed or expansive studies, I am leaving some further reading in the description box below that you can feel free and check out for yourself. For that, notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. As we said in the previous video, we met a individual. We should remember the individual on the right hand side here. This is Sir Douglas Haig. And we established some key ideas about him. That he's very attack minded. He believes in aggression, believes in the breakthrough offensive. He wants a massive victory and believes offensives will be the key to achieving that. He is now the commander-in-chief of the enter 1916 after the controversy that happened to John French, and this is going to be his first major campaign that he's going to oversee. The Somme was really the big test for him as a commander to see how the army would actually perform, especially at the Somme, where they were going to be the major attacking force, when usually it had been the French who have been providing most of the numbers. You should hopefully see we have a second individual on the left-hand side. Who is this? Well, this is Henry Rawlinson. We've mentioned him briefly before, but I'll give you a bit of background about him as well. Rawlinson is now the leader of the Fourth Army. He's actually going to be the one doing the bulk of the commanding for the Somme Offensive, both on the first day and beyond. And that's something to remember here. Although Haig is the commander-in-chief, it is Rawlinson who is going to be the one who is majorly responsible for what is happening on the Somme. Rawlinson is a bit more defensively minded. He's a bit more cautious in nature compared to Haig and his grand ambitions of vast and wide breakthroughs. For Rawlinson, he wants to follow two key principles in the upcoming offensive. The first principle is he recognises the BAF are quite inexperienced. They're still novices of combat. And so he wants to bear that in mind when he gives them instruction to keep things relatively calm and simplistic for them. The second key principle he wants to follow is the use of artillery. He believes that artillery will be the thing to destroy and batter the German trenches, and then it will just allow the BAF to naturally occupy the position. It shouldn't be much need for intricate combat. It should be a case of the artillery will batter and destroy the position, and then the men can occupy it. And so, with that in mind, he actually arranges a full week-long bombardment before the initial offensive of going over the top. And this bombardment consisted of over 1 million shells being launched onto the German position at the Somme. And this was throughout the day and throughout the night. It was relentless. It was destructive. It was believed by many soldiers after they saw the results of the land after the bombings, they believed there was no way that any man could have survived it. It's truly a sight to behold when, of course, it occurred, and many soldiers felt renewed with confidence. They really believed that when they were going to go over the top, they were going to enter battered German position, maybe find a few stragglers here and there, take and capture them, but there wouldn't be much resistance at all. In effect, the Germans should be, ideally, completely annihilated. And so, with that in mind, Rawlinson was quite confident of it and actually gave orders for his divisional commanders to allow their men to walk if they so desired. And some officers did decide to do that, did tell their men that it would be safe to do so. There actually are stories of some commanders and officers throwing footballs out onto the fields to kick them and spur the men on, kind of increase their confidence as they go out to fight. And this was the idea. After a week of continuous bombardment, by the time we get to July 1st, we are at the morning of 7:30 a.m. and we have over 100,000 British soldiers ready and willing to exit their own trenches, march across the battered land, and just simply occupy the German ones. They all were expecting it to be, as I say, be an easy job. However, the British pals were very brave, but they were about to undergo costly apprenticeship. So we've talked about the British there, but we've not really discussed the Germans. What was their situation? Well, you'll see on the screen, I'm highlighting a clear contrast in position. As we established in my trench systems video from a previous lesson, The British trenches were much more mobile in nature. They were tend to be quite scrappy, put together relatively quickly, and soldiers would be rotated throughout them at a constant rate of only a couple of weeks. And the idea for this was they weren't going to occupy them for too long. They were meant to enter the position, conduct an offensive, hopefully gain some ground, and then retreat after the rotation. The Germans, though, were not as offensively minded. They were much more defensive in nature. That was a key part of their strategy in this conflict. And this is recognized by their trench constructions at this time. So at the Somme hadn't really been a field of much combat for the Germans in the war up to this point. Also, mobile, as we said, was happening at Verdun currently. Flanders and Ypres have been significant boiling points. Somme was quite relaxed, quite vacant from any sort of combat, and consequently, the trenches were in more or less brilliant condition. It has to be said. They had loads of barbed wire covering the outskirts of the position. They had many sandbag pillboxes. They were entrenched 20 to 30 meters deep underground, and the Germans were, as I say, very, very safe. They also, of course, had machine guns. They had sniper team position. They were really ready for an Allied attack. They've been expecting some offensive at the Somme to eventually occur. After all, you can't move so many French and British troops without someone noticing. And so, with this in mind, the artillery bombardment that Rawlinson had been praising as the way to win and then allow the troops to occupy the space was not going to happen. It actually was ineffective. Many shells were actually duds, a problem that had carried over from Orber's Ridge and Lou's offensive the previous year. The factories simply weren't making them to the standard they required to be. And so the ones that did explode were destroying the land around it, not necessarily the pillboxes and the trenches at large. And for the barbed wire, they were snarling them up, which only made it tougher to cross when the British came upon them. So after this week-long bombardment, the Germans were very quick to exit their bunkers, man their firing stations, and within minutes they could machine gun into the British positions, and many of them walked into these bullets without realizing it. And this indeed is the tragedy of the first day for the British soldiers. Thousands of them were shot down or scattered in confusion. Many had to take emergency refuge in shell holes. Wireless telegraphy was scarce in no man's land, and officers were still quite rigid. Although Rawlinson was given some freedom of their commanding posts, they still were a bit cautious. They feared court martials. They feared being considered cowards and did not want to break the chain of command and order retreats independently. There was actually one captain. There was actually one captain in an Ulster division who lost two messengers to sniper fire before finally being able to retreat his men with a signed order from his superiors. However, it's worth noting that it wasn't all doom and gloom for the British at this time. A lot of the problems were in the northern parts of the sector when they were conducting the offensive on the 25-mile long front. In the south, where the French were in action and some Manchester and Liverpool pals, they were having more success. They actually were taking some of their objectives, and there were reports, of course, of soldiers who, rather than walking across, were actually crawling, were digging in, using sap trenches, and all in all, being fast, being mobile, being more like skirmishers, they were taking up the German positions and actually capturing the frontline trenches. The problem was, though, is that they couldn't control their flanks, and when it became clear that a breakthrough was not going to occur, they had to secede and give up their positions and retreat. All in all, 22,000 Britons were either dead or missing after the first day, with a further 38,000 wounded. Given the nature of the PAL battalions, we should remember that many of these men shared residency in the same towns or villages, so it meant that some English villages lost near enough, if not all, their entire population of young men aged between 18 and 30 overnight. July 1st remains the single biggest loss of life for the British Army in a single day of combat. And we cannot overlook the tragedy that it is. These are mass casualties, it's a mass defeat, and truly a grim place the British find themselves in after just the first day of combat. So, was this a costly apprenticeship on the first day at Somme? Well, a lot of things proved that indeed it was. The shells, as we said, failed to detonate properly, or actually made the positions tougher and cross. The Germans, to their credit, have been quite effective. They dug in, they stayed in their bunkers. When they came out quick and swift and managed to fight back the British and French forces. The British leadership, through Rawlinson in particular, was quite overconfident and giving some incorrect commands, relying too much on poorly tested artillery, and it resulted, as we say, in the single greatest loss of life for the British in a single day of combat. This is just the first day of combat for the British on the Somme, and we can't overlook the rest of the offensive. The Battle of the Somme was going to rain on for another 140 days right up to November, and as historians, we need the full picture to truly understand and truly make a judgment. While the first day was undoubtedly a tragic loss for the British, was the Somme campaign as a whole actually a failure? Or actually, was it a success? Likewise, can we be fair to blame the leaders for these errors, or are they going to learn from these problems, learn from these mistakes, and conduct a better campaign as we go forward? That we will have out in our following lesson. Do, of course, stay tuned for that. What's the most interesting part you found so far in the lesson and the series as a whole as we've gone through it? As said, do leave your comments down below. If you want to get some wider reading for this, check out the description box as well. We're leaving a few works you can check out there, especially if you're in the A-level group who may want to take this further for coursework or even prospective points at university level. Thank you as always for watching. I hope you found this quite insightful. I look forward to seeing my class again. This is History with Sire. Thank you for listening.